Hi, it's Dwyer of dwyercrime.blog. This is part 2 of the video on D.B. Cooper. I encourage you to look at part 1. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, the Netflix special, and it's July of 2022. The Netflix special, the current one on D.B. Cooper, right, who identified himself as Dan Cooper, has a whole list of assumptions that are simply unwarranted. I would question the lone wolf assumption. As the show talks about different suspects, even though we don't know who Dan Cooper was, the assumption is that he's a lone wolf. The assumption is that this is a solo mission, that he's on the plane by himself, doing everything by himself. That when he hops out of the plane mid-flight, and keep in mind, the flight plan is his, right? He actually gives it to the airline. Then they work out fueling in Reno as part of the flight plan. In other words, he's that prepared. We're to believe that when he jumps out of the plane, that there's no one on the ground to pick him up, that it's him against the world. Now, is that the way it went down, or is that what we want to believe? Right? Is that part of, let's say we'll call it American ethos, where we want to believe that this guy beat the system, not this guy and a few of his friends? So let's throw out some ideas here. And it's speculation, because understand, in my opinion, much of the Netflix show is speculation. If, as you're watching this video, you don't know who D.B. Cooper is, if you're uncertain, then how can you be certain about any part of what happened? So the $200,000 in early 1970s money today would be worth more than $1.3 million. Right? That's plenty of money to divvy up. Right? DB could have had an idea. Could have brought some friends in. Some friends could have helped him, because Lord knows there's part of this operation that would have benefited from having others involved. So, let me just point out, the plane itself, it's completely unwarranted. The idea that Dan Cooper is a lone passenger. You don't know if he has a friend on the plane. Understand, the friend could have just been there for logistical reasons, right? An extra set of eyes. Someone who, after the plane gets to Seattle, could have hopped off the plane, gets off, contacts some people in Washington State, that the plan is going as it should, and to update them on when exactly they can expect their conspirator, Dan Cooper, right? Moniker that we know is not an actual name, right? Dan Cooper, to appear in the wooded area as the plane flies overhead. Someone could have been on that plane because, again, folks, we don't know who Cooper is. This is the early 70s, extremely lax security. Someone could have been on that plane who authorities would have had a hard time linking to Cooper, who may have just been on the plane knowing that the hijacking is taking place. Right? The person could have been there just trying to make sure that things are as calm as possible. Well, let me just point out, too, that the operation goes off pitch perfect, doesn't it? Because we're now finding out that the bills were marked. The bills were actually on microfiche. Right? Think about it. The bills are on microfiche. Had they started to be passed, even though they're in, currency that can be used, they're in $20 bill format, right? That was insisted upon by Dan Cooper. But yet insiders knew that the bills were marked. This is similar to the Lindbergh kidnapping of an earlier generation. And you mean to tell me that the bills are never passed? It's as if Dan Cooper had inside information. It's as if someone somewhere leaked the news that the bills were actually traceable. Dan Cooper gets out of the plane with the $200,000. We know $5,800 is found by the water years later. Right? Folks, none of the bills have turned up in circulation. What happened to the other $194,200? What happened to them? Why wasn't it spent? Is it possible that it's not spent because Dan Cooper and his crew figured out that it couldn't be spent? Let's talk about the question, and it's raised on the Netflix show, as to why Dan Cooper kept quiet. He becomes a folklore after the hijacking, right? This is supposed to be the only hijacking in American history where the perpetrator gets away and we don't know who the perp is. Well, isn't there the possibility that the reason why Dan Cooper stayed quiet, right, apart from the idea that he dies during the jump and somehow is never found? Not him, not the parachute, not any part of him, apart from the money that's found by the beach. Right? Is it possible that he's working with friends who themselves want anonymity? That any act of revealing an identity would be viewed as a betrayal by the group of conspirators. On the show, and the show is so deep into its construct of Dan Cooper being a lone wolf, that at one point an investigator, who I'm sure had the best of intentions, approaches the guy he believes pulled off this heist. And he says, hey, here is a cashier's check for $20,000. You take this check, you agree to tell me your story. We'll have lawyers representing you in Washington, D.C. It's unlikely you'd be convicted because so much time has passed and you didn't hurt anybody during the hijacking, right? Understand, nobody gets hurt. Cooper is smart enough. He's mature enough. That's why I don't believe it's a 20-something. To let all the passengers leave the plane in Seattle. So this investigator firmly believed that it was Dan Cooper's decision to decide whether or not he wanted to accept a $20,000 down payment and then more money later when the book and movie deal got finalized to reveal his identity and his modus operandi. What if it wasn't his decision? What if he understood that, look, if I talk, then I'm placing other people at risk. I'm placing Joe, Jane, Bob at risk. What if, as I talk about the modus operandi, I have to start revealing that I knew certain information because I had an insider who was a co-conspirator with me, because I had people on the ground who helped pick me up on that rainy night in the woods of Washington State. What if you can't reveal the story because the story involves other people? Let's say Dan Cooper is military. Let's say some of the other people are military. Wouldn't you be jeopardizing not just their freedoms, but their military pensions? Right? What if it's a multi-generational type thing? They're conspirators. You can't turn yourself in because then you'd be jeopardizing your conspirator's son or daughter, right? Their anonymity. Their father might be taken away if, in fact, the FBI, the prosecutors decide, no, we're going to crack down here. And why wouldn't they crack down? Because didn't they leave their file open for more than 40 years? Why wouldn't they want some retribution here? The possibility that Dan Cooper is more than an individual, that the person on the plane is just part of a mission, right? Think Mission Impossible with Peter Graves or Tom Cruise, right? The idea that Dan Cooper is just one moving part in a situation that may have had other moving parts is not one that the people who made the Netflix film or that American folklore has even envisioned. Right? We seem to believe that it's open and shut if a suspect says on their deathbed, I'm Dan Cooper. Right? The assumption is Dan Cooper had to necessarily be a lone wolf, that Dan Cooper has no help whatsoever at any time. When he's on the plane, he's by himself, even though we don't know who he is. Right? We can't even envision that there may have been somebody else on that plane who's there for moral support, logistical support. Right? That's never envisioned. Right? The idea is that Dan Cooper can reveal himself or herself at any time. Maybe they can't. Maybe they took an oath. Maybe they have an allegiance to some people who helped them. So understand how confident the person we know of who's on the plane was. They get to Washington, right? There's a delay. It's supposed to be a short flight. The plane shows up, is taxiing Washington while, of course, the airline is gathering all of the money. Right now, understand, you would think that if this is just a local guy, an American guy, he would say, look, I want the money in cash. Wouldn't that be the phrase, right? I want it in cash. Low denominations. Here, Dan Cooper wants negotiable American currency. That's how he puts it. Negotiable American currency. Understand, we aren't quite sure what he wrote on the note that he gives the stewardess, because he takes that note with him when he leaves the plane. Understand, too, there is a hiccup in the plan. He gives the note to the stewardess who thinks he's just a guy flirting with her. That's how smooth he is, by the way. So the stewardess just drops the note in her purse. It's then that he leans over to the stewardess and says, you should read that note because I have a bomb. So they get to Seattle and they tell him that an FAA official wants to meet with him face to face. Cooper, again, seasoned, older, right, may have been a professional thief. This may have not been his first heist. Maybe a first plane hijacking, but even that is speculation, isn't it? Right? Cooper says, no. Let's get this show on the road. Right? As I said earlier, they explained to him, because he wants to go to Mexico City. He already has the flight plan. He wants to go to Mexico City. They tell him, look, that's going to take extra fueling. And we're going to have to make a stop along the way to refuel. He allows the extra fueling to take place at the Seattle airport. Then he agrees to the stop in Reno, which they never reach because this guy has a private agenda. It's to hop out of the plane over Washington State. Also, a stewardess is firmly convinced that this polite Dan Cooper character knew the area, because on the plane, he looks out the window and he says, oh, there's Tacoma now. He actually talks on the plane about the military base that's close by. Right now, here's the million-dollar question. How sophisticated is either this Dan Cooper or the group that put this together? Is Cooper grooming the stewardess? Are these lines Cooper is throwing out, lines to steer a later investigation of this crime in a certain direction? Or is this just a happy-go-lucky American folklore hero type who's so comfortable on the plane while he's hijacking it, while he's asking for a couple $100,000 in the early 70s, the equivalent of more than $1.3 million now? Is this just a chatty hijacker who's randomly looking out the window and talking about things he's seeing without a realization that they're going to be remembered and they're going to be scrutinized? I would argue, folks, it's the former. This is a high-level operation. Maybe Dan Cooper did this on his own. maybe he has help. Maybe that help is outside, right? People waiting in Washington for him to parachute down, right? Maybe it's outside, maybe it's also inside, right? Player, we've pulled this off, but our sources are telling us that these 20s, right, this negotiable American currency, right, it's requested as if he's a foreigner, right? This negotiable American currency that looks easily spendable, 20s, is actually marked. In fact, they have it on microfiche. So the money doesn't get spent. $5,800, almost 10 years later, is discovered by the beach, but yet there's no other money anywhere. Right? The bag holding the money is never discovered. No trace of Cooper is discovered. Right? The FBI wants you to believe that he likely died, but yet they spent 4+ decades maintaining a file on him. Clearly, any evidence of a possible death, botched parachute landing, could not be confirmed by the FBI. They kept the file open. Right? So just be aware that a lot of assumptions are being made about that flight, about the kidnapper, not the kidnapper, the hijacker. Right? A lot of assumptions are being made. We believe it was a lone wolf. What's the evidence of that? When we don't even know who the guy was. We don't even know if the guy safely landed. We don't even know, as I make this video, how the guy was able to leave the area. Right? He's carrying $200,000 worth of $20 bills. It's raining. He's dropped off in the woods. We don't even know how he gets from where he's dropped off. I would venture that we know even less than that. We don't even know if there's someone on the plane with him. How could we? Because we don't even know who he is. Right? So this folklore has developed of some guy beating the system on his own. Right? Really? This guy shows up with a flight plan on his own? This guy decides, I'm going to jump out here in Washington, as if the guy on the spur of the moment could have instead said, I'm just going to jump out the plane here in California. Right? Clearly the guy knew the flight route because, of course, he himself had picked the flight route. Right? Clearly the guy was ready to discuss refueling because that's what the guy did. Isn't this thought out? The person on the plane is not 20-something. That person's in their mid-40s. Wasn't this performed as if it was by someone in their mid-40s? And why wasn't the money spent? Lord knows the guy went through a lot to get the money. Is it possible the money wasn't spent because he received information that the money was marked? Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. I always welcome in-depth crime shows like the current show on Netflix. I just question its conclusions. I have no doubt that the investigators involved in trying to argue that a rack straw a former military guy, pull this off at 28 years old were well intended. I just questioned their conclusions. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.